if Dr. Blix and Dr. El-Baradei, who's dealing with the nuclear issue, will report to the Security Council this Friday, they will report. If the evidence they present confirms the behaviour which has put Iraq in continuing material breach, then the case for a second resolution would be overwhelming. And that was why you indicated before that you had that you were prepared at this point to come forward with a second resolution. But two things happened. The first, El-Baradei is moving towards a position where he's giving a clean bill of health almost on the nuclear issue. And secondly, Blix, perhaps worried that he'd gone too far on the 27th of January, is backtracking or saying there's now more cooperation. And the other thing that happens is on the 15th of January, there's the most enormous demonstration in the UK and elsewhere against the war. So at this point, the strategy that you've been developing for a second resolution is in quite serious trouble. You're not getting Dr. Blix giving you the green light, and the political difficulties in the United Kingdom are growing. So that the move to a second resolution after that is taking place against a much more unpromising background than it had been in the period up to the 14th of February.
I think you meant the 15th of February.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking of St. Valentine's Day.
If I may just take you back to the beginning of your question, you said words to the effect that we'd made a kind of misjudgment in that, I paraphrase your question, that we had, as it were, delegated the question of whether Iraq was in compliance to the inspectors. Well, to a high degree, we had. That was the purpose of 1441. It wasn't something inadvertent. The whole structure of 1441 was to say, put the inspectors in. These are the requirements on Iraq. Yes, of course, the formal position is that on the basis of evidence, the Security Council will meet to consider the position. And if there's a clear breach, Iraq will face serious consequences. But in practice, of course we were relying on what the inspectors said. And Sir Lawrence, had the inspectors said on the 14th of February, they're complying, I have to tell you, nobody would have been happier than me. That's what I was hoping for back in January.
But what they were saying...
we would have had something to say to the demonstrators as well.
But what they were saying was that it's still very unclear. There's still a lot more work to do, which was why the pressure was growing. And we heard from Jonathan Powell that we asked for 9 more weeks, I think he said, in order to try to take this further. But one of the consequences of the 15th of February presentation was that it undermined the American faith in what the inspectors were going to do, because they had always been more sceptical of this route and of Dr. Blix than had been the British government. So it made it even more difficult to keep the Americans working on the UN process.
Well, part of the American administration, as we've discussed, were always more sceptical.
But I mean, the key thing is what effect it had on President Bush's own views.
Yeah, but we got their cooperation for a second resolution. There was a great deal of toing and froing, there always is, with the American administration. And as I say in my memorandum, I can't speak for the position of the American government. Had Dr. Blix had said they're complying. I certainly can speak for the position of the British government. And I speak for myself, first of all. If Dr. Blix had said they're complying, I would have said they're complying. Number two, even I'd be mad enough to say they weren't, there wouldn't have been a dog's chance of getting a resolution through the House of Commons. But I mean, what I wanted was a report from Dr. Blix saying they were complying. He didn't say that then, and far from saying that on the 7th of March, a document which, weirdly, he delayed the publication until after the meeting, was saying quite the reverse.
It's clear that he was not able to give Iraq a clean bill of health at this stage. The question is, whether or not, with more time, this matter might have been resolved. And you mentioned the position of the French. Now, there's all sorts of issues about what the French really were after. It has been suggested that the French tried to indicate that they would not, if you just went ahead on the basis of 1441, they wouldn't say very much. But as soon as the issue of a second resolution came up, on the basis of where the inspectors had got to, they were bound to oppose it, and they made that clear quite early in January. So there was no secret that the French were working extremely hard in the opposite direction to the British and the United States at this time. It wasn't a sudden surprise in the middle of March.
It certainly wasn't a sudden surprise. Indeed, Dominique de Villepin, in mid-January, had decided he wanted to call, because they had the presidency of the Security Council, to call a ministerial meeting to discuss terrorism. And Colin Powell had called me to say, what did I think about this? And I said, well, I wonder if we'll just discuss counter-terrorism. I wonder if we might get on to the Iraq subject. Anyway, we were promised that it would simply discuss counter-terrorism. But it quickly developed into a discussion about Iraq, and then there was this press conference which Dominique gave whilst with the rest of us were at the French legation for our lunch, in which he ripped bits out of the American system, and that didn't go down.
It went down very badly.
So, but it was actually it wasn't before that. Relations had been okay. But may I just come back to this point? Look, we were dealing with a regime which had willfully refused to comply with UN Security Council resolutions going back 12 years. They thought they got away with it, and there was some evidence to suggest that they were, by messing around, playing the system, got comfortable with sanctions, and pre-9/11, the thing was just drifting away. We have 9/11, we've been through this process. We then get 1441, and they, to begin with, start to comply. Then they start messing around, and the only, I mean, to the degree they were complying, they were only complying because a very large military force was at their gates. That's the truth. And on the issue of time, I mean, first of all, I will check the record, but Sir Lawrence, I have no recollection whatsoever of the French saying to me, it'll be okay. I mean, either they can say.
I mean, as I said, there is some discussion in the United States that was what was told.
Well, they say. I mean, I will check this back. But I mean, and as you know, when you want to get a diplomatic message, you don't have to send a letter. There are all sorts of ways you can communicate.
Yes, but I mean that's just.
Sorry?
Could you slow down a little?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I mean, there are all sorts of ways we can communicate, but I never had that information at all. And what I would say, however, is because personal relations were certainly with Joschka Fischer and really with Dominique de Villepin were still okay, that if they'd said to us, look, we will come with you into a resolution, this is its structure, and we think this will work, we would have sat down and said, fine.